Okay, I am back. I have cut out my cardboard profiles. This is the front, I guess, and then the side profile. And I've cut this one in half because my plan is to glue one to the front and one to the back so that I have a sort of front and side profile of the bottle that I am enlarging. The other video again walked you through the steps of enlarging the shape and putting it onto the cardboard. If you have not used a grid before or enlarged something, if you have not used a hot glue gun, which we'll be using, or a utility knife, please watch some of the other videos that I have linked to that walk you through the safe and proper uses of those particular tools and materials. I want you all to be safe as you are working through this project. Again, scissors also can cut through cardboard if it is not super thick. And this project doesn't require super thick cardboard. So you might want to, if you have two boxes to choose from, look for the one that is a little less dense or thick to cut through. So a walkthrough of some of the other materials that we will need for this project. You will first certainly want to lay down a large sheet of plastic underneath your work surface, and if you have a second sheet, it might not even be bad to put it on the floor if you happen to be standing. Oftentimes I actually like to just lay out a big sheet of plastic in my kitchen on the linoleum and work there, just directly on the ground, and then use the plastic to kind of clean up as I go. Again, wherever you find a space, just make sure that you have a lot of plastic down, and I probably would try to avoid a carpeted area even with plastic down unless you put a layer of cardboard underneath. And this process will get a little bit messy, and so I just want you to make sure that you're kind of aware of that factor. But if you keep the plastic down, you should be good. And I also even like to put a layer of newspaper on top of the plastic, so you can see that I have newspaper all over my work surface as well. That way I can kind of scrape up the newspaper with all the extra bits and then have a piece of plastic to use again for another project. Okay, so drop cloth and newspaper. You will want a bucket. It doesn't have to be this large, but you'll need a bucket that you can have some water in and get your hand in, because you're going to be dipping these bandages inside of. So a tiny little yogurt container won't work. Even this might be a little bit too small, so I would try to find something a little bigger and a little wider. As a reminder, when you're using your plaster bandages and your water or plaster at all, you never want the water that has plaster in it to go down your sink drain. So I'm telling you ahead of time, not at the end of the video, just to remind you that plaster will ruin your sink pipes. But if you leave this water settle and pour off the water that's on the top after the plaster is settled on the bottom. I usually don't pour that down my sink drain. I still take it outside and pour it in the grass, and it's fine for the grass. It's just gypsum and calcium, some other things that are non-carcinogenic. Pour off that top liquid until you start to see white flowing through from the plaster, and then stop. And then you can take newspaper and scrape the rest of the excess plaster out, that sort of thicker gunk, and throw that away. And that way you never have to have any water go down your sink drain. So remember that step. That's super important about this process. You will need masking tape. Will be useful. If you don't have it, you could get away without it, but it could be a good sort of backup step that I'll describe in a minute. I have a hot glue gun plugged in front of me. You can't see that. That also could be useful. You could get away with just using masking tape if you didn't have a hot glue gun. And then you will need your scissors to cut your plaster bandages, and you'll need some plaster bandages. So you can buy plaster bandages in a variety of formats. The most common is sort of this like roll of plaster bandages. It's usually 4 inches wide, and you get 5 feet. And I've asked you to buy a couple of these for this project. And the other thing just to know is that if plaster bandages are something you like working with, then you can buy them in larger quantities as well. So the ones that I'm using in this particular demo came from this company here. I found that they all tend to work fairly similar to one another, so I don't have any particular one I'm endorsing over the other. I just like that I can get this in quantity. Whatever you purchase though, your leftovers that you have, keep it in a sealed Ziploc bag, or there's a bag inside of here that I wrap all the plaster bandages in, because the plaster is sensitive to moisture in the air, so I like to keep it sealed shut. Okay, put these away. I'll just set them over here. Okay, I think that we are ready for the next step then, which would be to assemble this form and then to start building things up. So as I mentioned, I will be putting one on the front and one on the back. I will try to get these in the center. I have noticed that this is a little bit longer than I need, and I'm making sure that all these sort of detailed shapes at the top line up. This is more important to me, what's happening up here versus what's happening at the bottom. And so it actually is more in line if I lower it and then just cut off the bottom. So I can also lay it flat, and that will help me get a more close I'm tracing the underside here, and then I'll just cut it with my scissors. It's just a thin little sliver. And then I'll just double check the same thing on the other one. It's easier to fix these things before they're assembled together. So that's why I'm kind of double checking now. Okay, so that looks good. If you're not good at eyeballing center, you can certainly make sure you have a Sharpie line drawn down the center to kind of act as a guide. So I'm going to use a little bit of tape just to kind of hold this in place, and then I'm going to use my hot glue gun to give it a little bit more strength and stability. Again, you could use just one, you don't have to use both. So the first shape is going to be easier to put on because this gets to lay flat, but when I turn it over, it's going to roll because it's going to be lifted. And I've realized this shape is a little sort of more wacky than this one. So I'll go with a less wacky shape to begin with to maybe have a little less struggle. When I cut this piece in half, I did not account for the thickness of the cardboard. It's so subtle that I don't think you're going to notice. If you had super thick cardboard or thick material, you might want to remove the thickness of the cardboard. So just going to reach. Yeah. So I have my hot glue gun. This one is one of the thicker diameter glue sticks, the large ones, but you also probably most likely have a mini glue gun, and that works great. I have, again, a demo on working with your glue gun if you've never worked with a glue gun, so you can watch that. I know that I'm just about out of glue, but this one didn't want to stay in yet, so. So another thing to kind of talk about as I'm working here is essentially what I am doing with this process is making an armature, which is a form that is underneath my sort of final surface that's helping me to build and flesh out the form so that I can put my skin or whatever surface that I'm working with over the top of it. This allows for you to make forms that aren't solid, so they're not as heavy. They're not using as much of the material, so that you're kind of saving on cost and resources and all of that. Now this is a little bit funny, thinking about an armature and thinking about how it can make a shape hollow, because these are flat planes, and so it won't be hollow, but it's still the same idea. It's still creating a framework from which we can build upon. And we're using these plaster bandages because they're a little bit more durable, and they also have an interesting textural quality to them as well. So you want to make sure that your hot glue is set before you turn it over. And it's okay that I didn't run the bead along that tape. This is going to be sturdy enough. Okay. I don't have guide marks on the back here. I do have some clear packing tape, so I'm just going to remove that. It's probably not a big deal, but the plaster bandages will stick better to a less shiny surface. Also, I realized I might cover the whole thing with tape, so maybe that doesn't matter. Okay, so this is where it gets a little funny because it kind of wants to rock. You could prop it up if your shape is really awkward and really weird. I think I'm going to be able to handle it. So we'll see. So I'm sight lining this to make sure that my top and my bottom aren't offset, and they look pretty good. So I'll go ahead and tack this bottom one into place. Okay, so I'm gonna go unplug my hot glue gun because I don't need it anymore for this process. And then I can see that I have a little bit of a balance issue here. And again, I want to fix that in the armature state, as opposed to trying to adjust it when I get to the final piece. Okay, so this one ended up a little longer now. Because this shape is a little awkward, I'm going to go ahead and try cutting this off with my scissors. I don't know if I can get that in there. Might have to actually use my utility knife. Remember, when you're using these, don't put out the full length of the blade, because the more blade you have out, the more potential you have to cut yourself. And I lock it in place. And I'm going to work on half of this, cutting it away from me, or away from my other hand. And then I can just turn this and rotate it. Close that up when not in use. Well, it has a little better balance to it. Still kind of got a high point. So all right, I did just unplug my hot glue gun, but it's probably still hot. So I'm going to grab that and actually just put a little glue here. If you go too far, you can always add more cardboard or sort of add a spacer to it. So I can kind of see where it rounded. If you have a lot of area to fill in, you would do it sort of 1 or 2 rows at a time. And the other thing I forgot to mention is if you don't have cardboard that is big enough to do your shape, you can always cut it and piece it together. You could tape it, overlap it, glue a sheet of cardboard on it. The armature in this particular instance doesn't matter too much because the bandages will cover a lot of that information, or if it has a little wobble, that will be okay. So that's starting to set. And I think that helped. So I think I just needed that little bit to kind of help with the balance. The other thing that I forgot that I thought about doing, which I think would be useful, but it's not totally necessary, would be to take your masking tape and to tape this entire form up so that it didn't get as saturated with water, because we're going to have plaster bandages that have water on them, and it'll end up soaking the cardboard. So I think that it actually is probably a good idea. I'm feeling pressed for time, which is why I'm hesitating whether I should do it or not, but really you should do it. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'll just go through the process of taping this up, and then we'll skip ahead to the next step. Okay, I'm back. I taped it up. It maybe took 5-10 minutes, and I think it's helpful. Again, there's going to be a lot of water. It's going to soak the cardboard. It could soften up the form a little bit. If you do only have cardboard and no tape, then try to be really aware of how much water is on your bandages before you apply them. This step does not have to look pretty. You can see it's kind of like slapped on there. And, this is a little funky. Can you see that? If I change the light. If you're a perfectionist, you can let some of that go. This just needs to go around the form. You're going to see that a lot of the form will start to disappear actually as we cover it. So some of these like subtle little curves might not become quite as visible in the plaster bandages. So just something to be aware of. If you also, though, if you tend to be on the sloppy side, you might want to rein it in just a little bit. So try to just find a nice middle ground. Okay.